switch it.
Yeah.
Switch over to
There we go.
All right, what's up, guys?
What's up, everybody?
I'm Mr. Ewerts.
And I'm Mr. Miller.
And today we're going to be talking to you about discipline through student responsibility.
I love me.
One of my favorite topics.
Yes, I love me some students that practice responsibility. Nothing's
students.
better.
Discipline.
Yeah, and you know who taught us that?
Marvin Marshall.
Marvin Marshall. What a guy.
Such a great name.
And today we'd like to tell you a little bit about Marvin Marshall's theory of discipline.
I think his parents liked alliteration.
Probably. My parents did too. Matt Miller. It's great.
All right, let's move on.
Diving in. So the overall strategy. So Marvin Marshall's whole thing talked about the outdated model of punishment and sought to change behavior by fostering social responsibility. So in this presentation, we're going to explore his theory a little bit, talk a little bit about its advantages, its disadvantages, maybe have a little fun while we do it. I don't know. But to quote my guy Marshall, young people aspire. We deprive them of the opportunities if we do not expose them to possibilities. So Marshall rated student behavior in 4 levels. The lowest was anarchy, no law or order. Number 2, bullying, in which students made their own rules and only obeyed greater authority. 3, conformity, complying, traditional extrinsic motivation. And number 4, our favorite, democracy, in which students exhibited commitment to social responsibility, or in other words, had intrinsic motivation. So his theory focused on the movement from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation.
Right, that's the overall goal.
Yeah, smart guy.
So, how do we develop intrinsic motivation? Big question.
Man. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, good thing we have good old Marvin Marshall to
Exactly.
show us a few ways.
Let's see what he has to say. Number 1, authority can be used without punishment. So this goes into the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is the desire for growth and success, and it comes from within. So an example might be seeking mastery over content in your education so you can have future success in careers. Extrinsic motivation would be
desire for growth results from the fear of punishment. So an example of this would be the want to seek good grades so your parents don't ground you. That would be the punishment.
Yeah, no one likes to get grounded.
So I've got to get an A+ in my English class so I can continue to whittle my fingers on my Xbox controller.
Yeah, and for me, when my parents grounded me, they grounded me from eating sweet stuff like Snickers and things like that. So one time I ate a Snickers behind my parents' back. A real sketchy kid. So this is different from the old style, because the old style is suffering is necessary to teach. This new style is that people learn better when they feel better. So this old style, you might think about old traditions of discipline, stuff like the dunce cap, in which students might be put in a position in which they're humiliated or frustrated or something like that. And there's this principle that if you don't act according to the way you should, you will suffer. But here's Marvin Marshall's hot take. If punishment were effective in reducing inappropriate behavior, there would be no discipline problems in schools.
Right.
Very, very spicy. So great teachers communicate and discipline in positive ways, not negative. They don't seek for the suffering of their students, but instead seek to help students grow in every opportunity they can. They focus on lessons like what is the reason the lesson is being taught. So for me as a chemistry teacher, some of the reasons that I might have for teaching lessons is encouraging students to practice scientific inquiry, curiosity, and learning a mastery over subjects so that they can practice systems of equations later in life. It is important that we as teachers, if we seek to follow Marshall's style, to communicate this clearly. Along with this, we must build skills that prompt students to behave responsibly. Skills like individualism, teaching students to work and take responsibility for their own actions, hard work, things like that. It is important that we instill these abilities in our students so that when they get out of our classroom,
they translate to real life.
Yes, they translate to real life. So overall, the big theme of question number 1 is that people develop positive self-talk and self-esteem through the success of their own efforts. We want to encourage students to become intrinsically motivated and take success in their own efforts.
And we're going to talk more about that transition in this slide. Number 2 is students must intrinsically choose to take social responsibility. So the goal in this is for us teachers specifically to teach these concepts of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and the benefits of intrinsic motivation. You need to emphasize, but first off, define these terms and let them know the definitions of both. I think a great way to do this would be to post them in your classroom so they're visible as well.
Some nice wall art.
Right.
Everyone loves a good poster.
These will emphasize and raise awareness for social responsibility as well as exercising self-control and students' choice in their own behavior. The bigger point to this as well is that we're wanting to point out their bad behavior, not the individual itself, but their behavior, not disapproving of that person, but what they're doing. Intrinsic motivation and classroom moves to intrinsic motivation in the real world, as we already talked about. So basically getting at the idea that once they are to graduate, this is something that can move along with them and help them to be self-driven outside of the classroom. Overall, we need to let our students know the expectations. And as I said, a really great way to do this would be at the very beginning of our school semester to define these terms for them, give them the expectation of what you're wanting to see out of them, and then post those within your classroom, and every once in a while maybe point them out.
Exactly. Right. Absolutely beautiful. Well said, Luke. Moving on to the next point that Marshall makes, self-evaluation and self-correction is essential for improvement. So we've all had those teachers who give us good feedback, and that's valuable. Getting good feedback from teachers is valuable, but ultimately we want to transition students to being able to give themselves feedback and learn from their mistakes that they make in the past.
Again, another thing that can be used in the real world.
Exactly. We see a recurring theme with that here. Pretty neat. So a way we can do that is teach the 4 levels of behavior, moving from anarchy to democracy. And then when students exhibit poor behavior, you can ask them to identify their level of behavior.
Right.
So if you have a student throw a can of sparkling water at another student in class perhaps, ask them what level of behavior does that fall under? And they might say anarchy, at which point this leads to the acknowledgement of social development and gives them a chance to move forward. With that, one of the strategies we saw in a teacher in the sparkling water scenario is that they ask effective questions. We must guide students to grow in their social responsibility. Overall, to quote Marshall, if a student is not punished, it will be easier for him/her to acknowledge the inappropriate behavior, self-evaluate, take ownership, and develop a plan. In this process, the student grows.
Grows.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. Ultimately, we want the student to be able to develop a plan by themselves. One of the techniques Marshall gives for this is giving a student's choices and asking questions in their self-evaluation.
Yeah.
He recommended having a form with the 3 questions listed on the slide. And when a student doesn't exhibit behavior in a way that you'd expect of them, you can give them that little sheet, that little form, and have them fill it out. After they fill out the form, you give them a choice in how they want to fill it out. Perhaps they want to fill it out in the back of the classroom or the front of the classroom, or maybe they want to have a friend help them fill it out. You, as the teacher, can go and meet with them about that form. It doesn't have to be a long meeting, just talk for a minute.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that meeting, to signify the fact that this is not a punishment, but an opportunity to grow, you take the form and rip it up in front of them. Basically what that says is, I'm not holding this against you, and ultimately, my goal as a teacher is to see you grow.
Yeah. If I could add something to that too, Matt, would be, and we'll talk about this later, but that I think at the very beginning of your development of this process, that forms would be really beneficial, but there may become a point where you don't even need it.
That's a great point. Yeah. Marshall also talks about the fact that this idea of using forms may be cumbersome in the beginning, but as time goes by, it becomes more fluid and easier for your students to understand. He also lists some ideas for helping students when they're repeating the same behavior and not making progress to get to the point where you're saying, I don't want to have to do this, but I'm going to need you to step out of the class because your behavior is distracting everybody else. Once again, it's saying, I don't want to do this. I want you to learn and grow in my class, but I'm also understanding that your behavior is taking away from everyone else's learning environment. So part of it is taking down that shield and telling students exactly what you expect of them and what you need from them. So overall, we must equip students to evaluate and correct themselves.
And Matt started talking about our next topic. Go ahead. You're good. Positivity. In your example that you just used, when you're pulling a student out maybe of the classroom, you want to meet them with positivity because positivity is a better teacher than negativity.
No way.
Yeah, and Marshall goes on to claim in his article that we used that students grow more when there is no threat of punishment. When students are threatened, they feel alienated, isolated would probably be a good word as well. and become more occupied in their thought process of avoiding that punishment rather than um, focusing on the curriculum that's being taught. Very few students don't want to succeed. You're going to have the majority of your students in your classroom that are going to be wanting and desiring to succeed. And if they aren't, something is getting in their way. So you could probably add to this, but I would believe that our responsibility as teachers is to the best of our capabilities, identify what that fear is, whatever is getting in their way, and removing it, and in that absence, adding positivity to increase their will and desire for success. The teacher should and wants to see the student succeed, and this should be demonstrated either by our words or our actions. It needs to be shown. Overall, in the grand scheme of things, people, as we actually already talked about this, but people do good when they feel good. That goes for us teachers as well as students.
Yeah, and then the classic example of this that I thought about was you're in a class and you have a question, but you don't want to ask your question because you're afraid of looking stupid or you're afraid of saying something wrong. So part of breaking down this idea of positivity being a better teacher than negativity is having a willingness to ask questions. Right. And so when we have that positive culture, students feel more willing to ask questions, get out of their comfort zone, and acknowledge, hey, we're all here to learn, and sometimes we make mistakes when that happens. So, moving on, we have a little scenario for y'all.
So go ahead, pause the video, pause this, go watch our other video.
Yeah, go grab
on
a snack,
YouTube.
Watch our video on YouTube.
Tell us what you think of our thumbnail.
Give us a like and a subscribe, perhaps. All right, now go do that right now.
Yeah.
Do it. We'll wait.
Okay.
So now that you've watched the video, you see this video demonstrates the impact that a culture geared towards individual motivation and growth can not only have on student-student interactions, but also teacher-student interactions. You see the way the two students interact. We believe that is indicative of Marshall's culture that he desires to create, students seeking to build up one another, and then also the teacher seeking to build up students as well.
Ms. O, we hope you liked our Zach Patterson's cameo.
Yeah. Yeah, we know he's taking some classes with you. We will be taking autograph signatures next time we meet in person for class. So if you need autographs, just let us know. We'll give you guys a discount. So, in summary, Marshall's style of discipline puts an emphasis on the student, not the teacher. It is the teacher's job to create a culture in which the students understand the consequences of their action, but don't act out in fear. To restate his 4 points, authority can be used without punishment. Students must intrinsically choose to take social responsibility. Self-evaluation and self-correction is essential for improvement. Essential. And finally, positivity is a better teacher than negativity. Yeah. And you might be thinking, Matt, this is great, but what about the advantages and disadvantages? Well, boom!
Boom!
How about them apples?
We knew you were going to ask that.
We got you!
We definitely didn't look at the rubric. So the advantages, we talked about this. One of the advantages where it puts the teacher at the head of his or her education, puts them in that role, and the teaches students to think for themselves. Sorry, I have dyslexia apparently. And transitions well to life after school and life outside of school, as we talked about with self-evaluation. What else am I thinking of? Intrinsic motivation, going to be able to be self-driven. I think if this is taught, the new generations that are coming into the classroom could be some of the most self-driven generations.
Indeed.
Yeah, you want to talk about
disadvantages? Yeah, sure. As for disadvantages, we both felt like this theory was more specific to secondary education students. We think, although it could help younger kids in smaller dosages, ultimately this theory applies best to higher level students when you're giving them the chance to exhibit their own motivation and take charge of their own education. Another disadvantage, you got something to say?
I was just going to say, I think that's partly due to the fact that students who are, especially in high school, are going to be thinking about their life outside of school. And so something like intrinsic motivation or self-evaluation is going to apply better to their lives. It'll be something that they can see as a tool that they can actually use outside the classroom.
Yeah, we love a student who thinks for themselves. So another disadvantage is it can be overwhelming for both the teacher and the student. It is at first a little time intensive, especially when dealing with children who continually to exhibit negative behavior because you have to continually reach out with them and work with them. We did feel that from a parent's perspective, parents would really appreciate this. It does, once again, it requires some coordination between the teacher and the parents, since you need the parents to be united on this front with the teacher towards inspiring self-determination in their own child and self-evaluation.
It'd be great if those things were continued to be taught at home and employed
exactly,
as well.
Exactly. But we think that ultimately this is something parents would appreciate as well, since it gives them the chance to see their child grow and invest in their education. So I think also students may at first be a little bit more uncomfortable with the idea, but as time goes by, they'd understand that, at least for this, we're putting in boundary lines, but we want the boundary lines to fall in pleasant places for them. We as teachers, we want to do our best to communicate. We're here to help them grow and help them learn as best as we can help them. So we want them to be at the head, and then we are there to help when need be. So moving on. The end is near! Oh no, the end is near!
But not just yet.
Not yet.
We have an important detail to show you. Sources.
Can't forget your sources.
This is the stuff that we got to teach you the stuff. Right?
Yeah. This is the teaching stuff right here. And now moving on. But the end! And thank you so much for watching our video.
Thank you for bearing with us.
Yes, for bearing with us. And it's very tricky to bear with us, but
we're like a married couple.
No.
We're
the old married couple. Want some sparkling water?
Yeah.
Okay. Go get your own can.
Oh, dang. Thanks for watching, guys.
Thanks for watching.
We'll see
y'all.